Erev Tov Rechavia. Good morning in Ann Arbor, and greetings to friends in Buenos Aires, in Temecula, in Delray Beach, in the snowy suburbs of Detroit, in Baltimore, in Ramati Fall, in Tirat Carmel. We've got people calling in from Park City, Utah, from Nashua, New Hampshire. We're covering the map today, and we're glad that you're all here with us to talk about the one thing that everybody can get happy about, the sun, right? I mean, like, no problems with the sun. With everything else we got going on, we got the sun shining. We had some snow here in the DC area, and of course, it's now the sun is out and it's melting everything away. And we're gonna have a beautiful day, and we're gonna have a beautiful day with you. My name's Wayne Firestone. I love hosting this show with you, especially on Sundays, to bring a little sunshine into our lives with friends, old friends, new friends from throughout Israel and from out the world of friends that Israel has. Today, we're going to hear an incredible story about an entrepreneur who looked up to the sun one day and saw opportunity. He and a group of friends were going to meet. Lior Handelsman is, you will get to meet and hear about his amazing journey with the sun and aided by the sun. He is one of the co-founders of SolarEdge. It was just a little startup in Israel, and now you can look it up on the public exchanges on NASDAQ and see what a company that grows into a global market looks like. It's one of the amazing stories of Silicon Wadi. There is a connection point to Silicon Valley, and you're going to hear the entire story today in this discussion. Before we jump into meeting Lior and learning about the company, I would like to ask, maybe for those of you that are on now, because as you're going to see, Lior's expertise now as in a venture capital fund, he invests in lots of different high tech and other opportunities. Tell us a little about how you are utilizing green technologies today as a consumer. What are the kind of products? Is it your car? Is it other transportation? Is it in your home, in your house? What are some examples of green technologies that you utilize every day, or at least every week, that are part of your natural lifestyle now? So if you have time, put a couple examples in. We got people calling in from Caracas, so we're covering lots of different hemispheres, even with daylight savings times here throwing everybody off. We've got a wonderful audience. So Lior Handelsman, who is in Tel Aviv, joining us today from Tel Aviv, where hopefully it looked like there's a lot of sun. Lior's in a short sleeve shirt, so I'm assuming it's a warm day in Tel Aviv.
Actually, it's kind of like a rainy, cool day. One of our winter days. I'm always in short sleeves, even at the peak of winter. So
okay, so misleading. It is actually a little cool in Tel Aviv today on a shady day. But lots of people in Israel, even on those shady days, grew up. Lior, I don't know, where'd you grow up, Lior, in Israel?
Born and raised in Tel Aviv.
Born and raised in Tel Aviv. And did you have one of those solar heaters connected at the top of your the Dude and Dude Shemesh?
So actually, since the 60s, it's the law in Israel. You have, when you build a home or even an apartment building below a certain height, you have to use solar water heaters. It's been the law from the 60s. So when you look at the roofs of Tel Aviv, you see a lot of solar water heaters.
Well, you've had the opportunity to look at those roofs as a resident of Tel Aviv and as a young kid growing up in Tel Aviv. But at some point, you looked at it through another lens. You served 11 years in the Intel Core Tech Unit 81. You got your bachelor's in electrical engineering and your MBA from Technion. As I recall, that electrical engineering department at Technion is one of the biggest in the world, and really at the cutting edge of both research and technology. At what point did you start hatching some of your ideas that you might be able to harness the sun? Did that happen during your studies, or did it happen at a later point?
So it happened at a much later point, actually. And even when we started SolarEdge, it wasn't called SolarEdge. And I have a slide on it, actually. We initially started the company with the notion that we will do something. We found the solar market only months later. So it wasn't that we were always focused and targeted on solar. Once we found the solar market and realized we can bring a lot of innovation to it, it was clear that we have a good match. Not just that we can bring a difference to a market that we felt is going to be a big one, it's also a kind of company that does good to the world. It was a perfect combination for us.
Okay, so before we jump into your passion of many years building this company and building the technology, what are your other passions? What is Lior likely to be found doing in the Tel Aviv area? Do you escape Tel Aviv? Do you stay in Tel Aviv? Tell us a little about the parts of Tel Aviv we should all know about.
So first of all, a lifelong passion for me is actually engineering and electronics. For my bar mitzvah, I asked for lab equipment. So I've been dreaming of being an engineer from a very young age. But my other passion, which I am pursuing actively at least one day a week these days, is carpentry. And at some point when I grow up, I will be a fine woodworker.
Wow, that sounds like fun. All right, yeah. Lior, I know you've given a lot of thought to and have done on probably many occasions for your company, shared the story, but tell us a little bit about the people, the technology, the idea, your journey to get where we are, and of course we're going to invite later the viewers to call in with questions, etc., and we'll continue this as a dialogue.
Perfect. So the presentation that I've built here is actually a combination. It's a combination of our story with a few anecdotes and entrepreneurial lessons along the way, combined with the story of the solar market and what is now referred to as the smart energy market, not just the solar market. So I've tried to combine both of them, a business story, a market story, and a personal story in one presentation. And hopefully it came out okay. And if not, then don't tell me. But I do encourage questions. And if you want to stop me and ask for clarification questions, go right ahead, or someone from the audience. So this is how it started, right? So we were 5 friends. As you can see, we were much younger. This is 16 and a half years ago. We served together in Unit 81, which is a technological military intelligence unit. And we had the notion that we work well together and we're friends, and friendship is one of the most important things. And I'm proud to say that we are still together as friends, with the exception of a guy which has passed away from cancer, but we were friends until his last moments. And that is very important in a 16-year entrepreneurial journey to stay close friends. It's super important, and it's my blessing to find these people at an early age in my life. So when we started, every startup company is basically measured by MT square, market, team, and technology. So we were a T square looking for an M. We knew that we work well together. We all had what we felt was good engineering and managerial skills. We knew a lot about power electronics and electronics in general and how to develop complex systems. We just didn't have a market for it. And we pretty much for months, we explored various markets and we looked for the right market to apply our skills. And at some point we found the solar market. So the solar market in 2006, these are solar systems. And when you look at solar systems, what you see are the solar panels that are on the roof, but somewhere in the back of the system, there's a device called a solar inverter. And these devices in 2006, the leading companies selling solar inverters were all the big industrial companies. General Electric, Siemens, ABB, Schneider Electric, another big company called SMA, a German company. And they were all competing on one metric, efficiency. So what do inverters do? You have these solar panels, they're connected in strings, like think of them like batteries, and they're connected in series, like Christmas lights. And eventually, when you connect enough of them in series, you have high voltage and high power, and it's all DC power. It's like DC voltage, like a battery, and they go into the solar inverter, and it inverts the DC power to AC and feeds it into the grid. So that's what solar inverters do. And it's a very simple way to build solar systems, but also a very inefficient way to build solar systems. So when we looked at the solar market in 2006, we were amazed. You take all these solar panels, which cost so much money, you connect them to these devices, and every panel which is shaded, or a panel which is soiled, or a panel which is defected, it draws down the performance of the entire system to the level that you can lose 20–30% of energy over one or two soiled panels, which really doesn't make sense. And all the companies were competing on the efficiency of the actual conversion. So they were doing a very good job, 96–97% efficiency, but losing 20% over the serial connection, which was very simple. That's why people used it. And we realized that, and we developed a device called the power optimizer, which looks like a small box, but it's actually very complicated and has a semiconductor chip inside. And power optimizers, when you connect them to the solar panels, they allow for the solar panels to work independently. So even though you still connect in strings, so it will be simple for the installers, they actually decouple the series string, allow every panel to outperform and basically give out the maximum that this panel can give out. So you can gain 20% additional performance from the system. And they provide a whole bunch of other advantages like safety and ease of installation and a lot of other good things. And the second thing that we brought into the market was connecting these optimizers and the solar inverter, which is still needed, connecting them to the cloud and providing the customers with a monitoring platform, which allows them to remote monitor the system and to, in some cases, remote maintain the system. So this was the SolarEdge aha moment. We patented this topology where you have power optimizers, an inverter, and a monitoring platform. And we felt that it's a much, much better way of doing a solar system. And now that we have MT squared and not just T squared, we needed more money. And before we went to raise, you need to understand how the solar market was incentivized back then in 2006. So basically, you would build a solar system, and there were two ways that you could get money out of that. One was called feed-in tariff, where basically you can generate power whenever you have power, whenever the sun is shining, and the utility would pay you an added fee for the power that you generated. That's feed-in tariff. And the other way, which was very common in the US, was called net metering, which basically means that you generate whenever you want to generate, you consume whenever you want to consume, and at the end of the year, there's this billing method where they reduce the amount that you generated from the amount that you consume, and that's how much you pay. which basically means you can generate in the summer and consume in the winter and still get the net bill, which was, these are basically the two ways that you could get money from your solar system. Now we had technology, the market was starting to ramp up, mainly because there were these two incentive mechanisms, and we needed to raise money. And who do you go to? You go to venture capital firms. And we started to look for a venture capital firm so we could get a lot of money. We wanted $11 million, which was back then a lot of money. And finding a venture capital firm is like finding a spouse, right? You are connected to them for many, many years, and you need to have a VC, an investor that has the same mindset as you. And we found a big problem because most of the VCs, most of the investors that we spoke to told us, we want you to go the OEM way. Take your power optimizer, this great technology that you developed, and sell it to the big guys. Go sell it to GE, go sell it to SMA, go sell it to Siemens. And we didn't want to. We felt that if none of them buy, there are 11 big companies, if they all say no, then we're left with nothing. We wanted to develop a whole system and go and compete with them. It was very hard to find investors with our mindset. Eventually, we were very lucky. We found investors both in Israel and in the US that had the same mindset like us. And we managed to raise the $11 million, and we went on our journey to build this great technology and sell it. And everybody knows when you have an entrepreneurial journey, you have surprises. So we are now, there's a time scale here. We are now at 2008. Which is almost 2 years after we started the company and looked for what to do. So 2006, we mainly looked for a market. 2007, sometimes at the middle of it, is when we got our first investment. 2008, we are still 1 year ahead from releasing our product to the market, which what turned out eventually as 1.5 years. And you see this guy here, this guy here is called Brian Hala. Brian is the CEO of National Semiconductors, a very big company, a multi-billion-dollar company. And he's unveiling in this press conference a device called SolarMagic. And if the SolarMagic looks familiar to you, that's because it's a power optimizer. And National Semiconductor, 1 year at least, before us is unveiling a power optimizer to the market. And Mr. Hala is saying that he believes it will be 1/4 of national semiconductor revenues in the long run. And I don't know about my co-founders, but I can tell you that I was terrified. When I saw this news release, I was petrified. Because this huge company, National Semiconductors, is ahead of us in the market. They say that they are 6 months from market release, and is doing what seemed to be exactly what we are doing. And I was really, really, really scared, and almost felt like we're going to lose the market to National Semiconductors. In actuality, this was probably the best thing that could have happened to SolarEdge, especially at least in the early days, because National Semiconductors, they poured millions of dollars into market education. They did a lot of marketing to the entire solar market to explain to the solar market why SolarMagic, or basically power optimizers, is the best thing for the solar market. They basically educated the entire market with a lot of marketing dollars that power optimization is the future of the solar market. And when I started to approach customers, it was amazing. I didn't need to tell them what we are doing. I just started explaining, and they said, "Oh, this is like SolarMagic." But they learned that our product, when they tested it, they learned that our product is better, had better efficiency, had more features. For example, we had a monitoring server and they didn't have a monitoring server. We were selling cheaper because National Semiconductors was aiming for high margin, and we as a startup were not aiming for high margin. And it was simply amazing. We were able to ride the coattails of their marketing and actually sell our product or get early customers thanks to their marketing and thanks to their lower performing product. Eventually, National Semiconductor withdrew from the solar market, leaving all the millions of dollars of marketing efforts to us. So it turned out to be amazing luck for us. I'm going to stop and ask if there are any questions.
Yeah, Lior, so I can imagine when you read the headline and you were concerned, you had to suddenly compete against this gorilla.
Frightened. The world was frightened.
You were frightened, but you know, in a sort of like David and Goliath, you know, situation like this, how were you able to, you know, just sort of navigate that? Obviously, what you said, it played out to your benefit in the end, but how, you know, being based in Israel, and I know at some point you did go to Silicon Valley and you have colleagues there, et cetera, but like how do Israeli companies that are small and are competing on global markets, often with very big players, how are they able to get like the business intelligence and the instincts to know, okay, we just have to ride this out, or you know, how does that work?
So ride it out is when there's hardship, you need to ride it out. In terms of the business intelligence, me and everyone in the company, Guy, the CEO, and everyone that was more business focused, we were continuously abroad with customers. I was pretty much every other week somewhere in the world meeting customers, learning the market, doing the research. You cannot win the market from afar. There was no market in Israel at all, so I was continuously abroad. To our luck, in 2008, 90-something% of the solar market was in Europe, which was easier because it's simply closer. So there was almost no market in the US back then. So I was focusing on Europe, which in one or two slides, you will see that it might have been a mistake also, but we'll talk about it in one or two slides.
Great. Okay. I'm not going to go through the question. Some of the questions are text specific that we'll wait until you tell the full story of the company and we'll come back to them. But I just want to acknowledge Dr. Weinstein's comment that it was Israeli chutzpah that to compete in this kind of market, which often is, you know, a part of that riding out the storm, or not letting that distract from your primary goals.
We spoke among us and we said, right, it might be that this is the company killer, but throwing in the towel is not an option. So we, like Guy said, shut up and keep rowing. So we shut up and kept rowing. So we are now at 2010. We finally have a production line and we start sales, and we started to bring talent, and we started to hire international talent because there is so much you can do when you're flying to all these different markets. So we started to recruit people mainly initially in Europe, but then also in the US. And then we had another streak of luck. In 2010, when we started to manufacture, this happened. This is an electronic component shortage, very similar to what you have today. Very different reasons. Today is because of supply chain breakage and COVID and a lot of other things. But in 2010, there was an electronic component shortage. And it played out to our benefit in a great deal because what is always true is when you are having a hard time, your competitions are probably having a hard time also. So that's more of an opportunity than it is a hardship. You need to look at it as if it's more of an opportunity than it is a hardship. We were small, we were very agile, we were able to get components for what we wanted to sell because we were not selling at very, very high volume. Our competition, Siemens, GE, SMA, they had massive orders because 2010 is when the solar market in Europe boomed and they couldn't fulfill them. They couldn't fulfill them because they didn't have enough components. So we were able to leverage on that. A lot of our first customers did not buy SolarEdge because I have beautiful eyes and did not buy SolarEdge because we have amazing tech. They bought SolarEdge because we could deliver something. I would meet these customers that said, SMA can't deliver the 20 megawatts of solar inverters they promised me. If you have something, I'll buy from you. And that was sheer luck because it was easier to sell because some of the customers did not care about the shortcomings of SolarEdge. We were young, we were from Israel, we were not, we didn't have a reputation in the market, but we could deliver something, so they bought from us. So we were able to leverage on the hardship of the competition, be very agile, manage to get components and deliver products, which is again a streak of luck because this component shortage hit us right when we were ready to actually sell. So jumping forward 2 more years, look at our sales. So first year, we were able to sell $12 million of a product, which is amazing for a startup company on its first year. Much of that, I must admit, thanks to two facts. One, as I told you, component shortage. And two, as you can see in the gray bar, we were willing to lose money. And the competition was not willing to lose money. So we were able to price aggressively, pay a lot extra for components, and we were selling. We sold $12 million, but we lost a lot of money. 2011, we grew from 12 to 42. We lost pretty much the same. So we were better operationally. We were learning the ropes of how to manufacture efficiently, but we were growing because the solar market was also growing. So once we had customers, they grew and we grew with them. In 2012, we were selling more than double, $88 million, still losing lots of money. And then this happened. What you see here is a market projection from 2012. So if you remember, I told you that most of the market was in Europe and a very small market was in the US. But when we looked at the market projection, what we saw in 2012 is that the market in Europe is bound to shrink. There were a lot of regulation changes. Europe went into a very severe financial crisis in 2012, if you all remember. And every market prediction said that the European market is going to pretty much collapse. Look at the data. But the US market was starting to finally grow. And 2012 was really one of the years where we as management are more proud. We basically rallied the troops. By then, we were more than 100 people. We explained to the entire company that hard times are coming. We did a little bit of a reduction in force because we knew that the growth that we saw cannot continue. We built a whole strategy around basically penetrating the US market. That's when I also went and spent some more time with my family in the Bay Area, all in the purpose of building a team in the US and focusing on the US market. So it was very interesting times because we knew we need to capitalize on the growth of the US market while the European market collapsed. So how did it actually look? So 2013, we barely grew. We barely grew because the market in Europe started to shrink and we didn't penetrate the US market, but we lost much less money. We lost much less money because we were better in terms of operations, and we were better because we did a reduction in force. 2014, if you remember the drop, 2014 looked like this. We managed to grow. All of this growth is in the US market. In 2015, we doubled. Again, all of it was in the US market because the European market was still in shambles. If you want to see how it looks, this graph is our market share in the US residential solar market. Beginning of 2013, we had 0 market share. By the end of 2015, we were the largest company in the US market. By 2019, we already had 60% of the market. This is probably the graph where I'm most proud of, right? So of course, I didn't do it alone by far, but I was very, very, very much involved in adapting our products, creating a product strategy, finding a team in the US, signing strategic deals. Among these, one of the best deals that we were able to sign was with SolarCity. SolarCity was the largest national residential installer in the US. It's an Elon Musk company. Today, it's Tesla Energy. And we were able to win that account over ABB and basically grow with the growth of SolarCity. So much of this growth is based on that, but not only. And again, I'm going to stop if there are any questions.
Well, maybe just, Lior, you could, I mean, the graph speaks for itself and the accomplishment, but what did that actually mean to like switch your primary marketplace from Europe to the United States? And did you have to, did it affect the kind of products or services that you had to provide, or just understanding the business climate and when you're talking about the customer in this respect?
It was almost like a pivot. So first of all, we learned that our products in terms of, it's still a power optimizer, it's still a monitoring server, it's still an inverter, but in many facets and factors which are more on the finer details of spec and design were completely not suitable for the US market. It basically explained why we were not able to penetrate that market until then. So there was a tremendous R&D effort to modify all the products so they would fit the US market. It's a lot of small things and a lot of small certifications. That was one thing. The second thing was, and mostly what I did when I was in the US, was to learn that the business channels in the US are completely different. I won't bore you with B2B2C and the way the distribution works in the US versus in Europe, and all the TPA and third-party ownership models that were in the US market. It was a much more sophisticated market than the European market. And we had to learn the ropes and adapt the entire product marketing language to fit that market. And there were a lot of, a lot of legwork, a lot of new customers to meet, which we did in a very, very short time. Since other than being in the US, when I was back in Israel, I was in the US every other week, and in some cases every week, together with building a team in the US, which a lot of the success is to our US team, finding the right people.
So you mentioned you got a big client in the early stage of Tesla, and Jim is asking what would happen if Tesla decided to create their own inverter. Like, sort of, what does that happen with a company that size? Or
so today Tesla has their own inverter. They still buy from SolarEdge whatever they buy, but today Tesla has their own inverter. I can tell you that working with them, I don't know if you saw, most of you probably saw The Princess Bride, where the Dread Pirate Roberts tells Wesley every night, good night, Wesley, I didn't kill you today, I might kill you tomorrow. So for a lot of our experience with Tesla, even though the people are great and a lot of them are still my friends, this was the type of the discussion. Every quarter they would say, you guys are expensive, and because we were selling expensive. and we're going to replace you either by buying from someone else or developing internally. And what we had to do every quarter is come up with new value proposition, new features, new way of making it harder for them to replace us. And for many years it worked. For many, many years it worked. But the discussion was exactly like that. This is the last quarter we're buying at high volume from you. We are replacing you to a cheaper solution or an internal solution. Eventually, a lot of it happened, but it took so many years, much more than what you see in this graph even. By then, by the way, Tesla, which is still a great company, had much smaller market share. A lot of other players became number one. We were the number one inverter in the market. We were much, 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 much less dependent on them.
Well, Lior, I can tell you we've had over 200 episodes of these webinars, and that is the first reference or quote from Princess Bride. So I just want to congratulate you for bridging a cultural gap that we had not yet reached. So why don't you go ahead and finish with the last slides, and then we'll pick up with the remainder of the questions.
Sure. So with these numbers, you can IPO, right? We were finally profitable. By the way, a funny story to all the people that know the tech market today. In 2014, no one would take us public. $200 million sales, almost profitable. All the bankers said you cannot IPO. These are bad numbers for a tech company. It took us to get to these numbers to be able to IPO the company, and we IPO'd in 2015, which was a great moment. And then the market changed. So the graph that you all see here is called the duck curve. I don't know if any of you saw this graph before. I'll explain it. This is a day, one arbitrary day, March as an arbitrary day. What you see here is basically the load on the California grid. So in 2012, this is how the load looked like. This is early morning, people waking up, starting to consume energy from the grid. This is late night. And this is when they go back home at the evening, and again, consumption goes up. And from 2012 onwards, started to create the belly of the duck. The belly of the duck is created because these are the solar hours. A lot of solar systems are generating power. If I remind you, net metering, people can just generate whenever they have power. So a lot of power is pushed into the grid in the noon time, which means that there's less load on the grid because there's a lot of generation. And then as the sun goes out and also people go back home, the head of the duck is created because there's lots of grid. And this ramp from the belly of the duck to the head of the duck is super hard on the utility companies to the point where it threatens the stability of the grid. So this is called the duck curve. And at some point, utility said enough. We will not take more systems, just dump power at midday. If you have extra power, either you use it or you lose it, which mandated a battery. So this is one of the biggest transformation in the solar market. In all countries pretty much today, solar systems are being transitioned into what is called maximized self-consumption. Generate energy, consume it locally. If you have extra energy, don't push it to the grid because we don't need your extra energy. Save it in a battery, use it later. And that was a huge challenge because no inverter company back then had the ability to provide a battery, and no inverter company had the ability to effectively manage such a system. So we realized that it's, again, I remind you, if it's hard for you, it's hard for everyone. So we realized it's an opportunity. And we also had a great partner. We had the SolarCity guys, which it was an Elon company. And we started to talk with them about collaboration with Tesla, where Tesla would bring the battery and we would bring the solar smarts and the management of the system. And 2 weeks after my discussion with them, I find myself sitting with this guy. And that turned out to be a great partnership, this time with Tesla, not with SolarCity, where Tesla released to the market their Powerwall, their residential and commercial battery pack. And SolarEdge was the integration, the solar brains, taking the power from the solar panel, managing it, and also relaying it to the battery. It was a great partnership. It was tremendous in our ability to take more market share. And even before someone asked me, it was clear from us from the beginning that there would be a point, actually, Elon didn't hide it even, that there would be a point where they would transition to an internal solution. This is why we, in parallel to this, developed our own battery. And today, SolarEdge is selling inverters and batteries, and Tesla is selling inverters and battery, and sometimes we collaborate and sometimes not. There's excellent competition between the companies. But back in 2015, this was a great deal that brought a lot of business to both companies. And this is how it reflected in the numbers. From this point on, we were profitable and growing and growing and growing. By 2018, actually, when we almost hit $1 billion of revenue, SolarEdge was the largest solar inverter company in the world, with a very nice growth trajectory and a much more complex business. Because if you already have a system with a battery that you can self-consume, you can actually start offering services to the grid. Because you have excess energy, you can support the grid when the frequency is not stable. You can support the grid when there are voltage issues in the grid. And today, when you look at the overall offering of SolarEdge, so let's look at a residential example, but it's the same in commercial. Not only that the company sells inverters, of course, power optimizer, it also sells solar panels and batteries and EV chargers and additional devices like a smart hot water heater and devices to control your heat pump and your air conditioning. And basically what we do today is we manage the energy of the home or manage the energy of the building to the point where not only that we can maximize self-consumption, we can also offer grid services. And we sell utilities with this aggregation software, which allows them to pull together a lot of systems into what they call a virtual power plant. In the sense that they can leverage the systems to stabilize the grid. Homeowners and building owners get additional revenue streams, not just from the energy that they produce, but also from grid services. It is called the vision of the prosumption. We are all prosumers. You're not just consumers, you are prosumers. You consume, you produce, you are part of the grid. Make no mistake, when we all have electric vehicles, your car is part of the grid. You charge it at times where the grid is convenient for you, convenient for the grid, and you take part of that energy with you when you drive somewhere, and you can feed that energy back from your car. We are all part of the grid, and that's basically what SolarEdge is selling today. Much more than just inverters, it's a whole smart energy system. And last slide. Today, the company is still the largest solar inverter company in the world. There's like 30 gigawatts of systems with SolarEdge hardware inside, and millions and millions of devices that are produced. Today, SolarEdge manufactures more than 1 million power optimizers a day. But then the numbers that I'm most proud of are these numbers, right? 405 awarded patents, additional 400 patents that are in application. Because like every company that comes out of Israel, you cannot win by selling cheap. You win by technology. You win by innovation. That's why there's such a big focus on innovation. Thank you.
Wow. Number one in the world. That is quite an accomplishment. And there are so many pieces of this. First of all, thanks for Lior pulling together, like you said, the personal, the business, the technology. They're all for you, what you've been living, but really just a fascinating story about how you took this, your group of army buddies essentially, and built something that now touches people all over the world, and that's really quite an accomplishment. And I should add, part of a broader trend of people thinking about, I want to come back to the use of the term prosumer, but we do know that younger generations have expressed a great deal of interest in the values behind renewable energy. And, maybe you could just say a word or two about that. I realize this is a business first and a business success, but I think it's worth maybe you're sharing a little bit about what that broader trend of the world rejecting certain fossil fuels and thinking more long term in a way that younger generations, perhaps your future customers, may even be more aligned in their solar cars, et cetera, in the future.
So I'll start with today. Today, the generation of solar energy is pretty much the cheapest way to create energy. Now, I will add a few reservations to this, but if you compare a kilowatt hour generated out of a solar panel to pretty much any other way of making energy, with maybe nuclear in some cases, it is cheaper. It's cheaper than wind and cheaper than gas and cheaper than coal and cheaper than oil and cheaper than everything. And that is, it wasn't like that for many, many years. And initially solar incentives needed to be in place. But today, generating solar energy is cheaper than anything. Where is the caveat? The caveat is that solar energy is intermittent. You don't have it in the night. You have less of it in the winter. You have quite a lot, by the way, in the winter, but not as much as you have in the summer. And this means that it cannot serve as the only means of generating energy because you need some kind of base load. So it's not like I think that solar energy can replace base load in any time soon, but what you see today is the coupling of solar energy with storage. Now, batteries are not cheap enough yet. And this is why solar energy is still having a hard time competing in some cases, in some places with gas. It can easily compete with coal and oil. But the price of batteries is declining at such a fast rate that you can see a future around 2029, 2028, 2030 maybe, where even with battery solar energy is cheaper, while the cost of energy from gas is on average, don't show me specific examples in the gas price charts. On average, as a trend, is ever increasing, and the cost of solar energy, even with storage, is still ever decreasing. So it's definitely the source of energy for the future. A lot of other technological advancement need to happen. For example, seasonal storage, when that is available, solar energy would be even cheaper. But in general, it is the energy of mankind for the future because it replenishes, it is cleaner than any other fossil fuel energy, and it's becoming cheaper and cheaper.
That's sounds like all good things, both for the company and for us as prosumers. So let me get some of these questions in to make sure we have some time for them. Our friend Harlan in Minnesota wants to know about, are there examples of solar energy being successfully interfaced with hydronic heat pumps using geothermal sources as a primary source of latent energy?
Geothermal energy is great because if you can reach the geothermal source at a reasonable cost, then you have an almost endless heat source, and you can convert that heat to energy in a not very efficient process, but still, at the overall, at a high enough scale, it is very cost effective. What people need to understand about our electrical grid in general, and there I will touch on the problem, is that a lot of the cost of electricity is not the generation, it's the transmission. Geothermal energy, like gas and like coal, doesn't scale down well. So in order to get a cost-effective geothermal plant or a gas power station, you need 100 megawatts, 50 megawatts, 500 megawatts, because only at high scale does it is it cheap enough. One of the huge advantages of solar is that you generate where you consume. You generate on your roof, you generate on the roof of the factory, which means you reduce dramatically the cost of transmission. And this is why solar, most of the solar is aimed for rooftops or generation very close to where people consume it, where it's harder to do that with geothermal. So you can combine them at the grid level, but through what is called the medium voltage grid or the high voltage grid, it's very hard to combine them locally. And one of the big advantages of solar is that you don't need to beef up your grid because you generate where you consume. Whereas when you generate from gas or from even wind and geothermal, you need to transmit the power into where people actually consume it, which is additional cost.
Great. So I was just at an exhibit here at the Smithsonian on the futures that was showing cars of the future, and they showed us they had a prototype for a flying car. I guess my question to you is, as I listen to you talk about, the market 10 years out and 5 years out, as you're thinking, we tend to think about what are the devices, what are the uses today, but I guess on this kind of scale, you have to be thinking about not just what the current uses are, but what the future markets are going to look like. Where do you see potential like big changes in the market? Are they going to be in transportation? Are they going to be in homes? Are they going to be in consumer devices?
So I already touched on the change that we will all have in our homes and building, where everything is managed. You need to understand that shutting down your air conditioner and taking off 5 kilowatts off the grid is exactly like pushing 5 kilowatts of energy into the grid. So smart devices and smart interaction, where it is controlled by some kind of algorithm, is coming, and we all see it. It's not that hard to imagine that. The second big change, is that by 2030, more than 50% of new cars will be electric. EVs are a big disturbance to the grid. They're a big disturbance to the grid because we all can't just drive home at 6 p.m. and plug in our car. The grid would collapse. So EVs and EV charging would be managed, and the EV would be part of the grid. Another big change is that we're going to have to develop some form of seasonal storage, where we can generate a lot of solar energy in the summer and use it in the winter. Batteries are not suitable for that. Some are thinking about a pumped, some kind of compressed air storage. I won't touch on the technology. Others are thinking on hydrogen, basically leveraging the electrical power from solar, electrolyzing, let's say, water, creating hydrogen, and then burning that hydrogen in the winter season in order to generate electricity. It's not clear yet what would be the winning solution for seasonal storage. Definitely a problem that everyone is working on. I think these are the main big changes that we are seeing these days.
Yeah, there's a question here that I've often wondered about from one of the viewers. We tend to think of solar fields or as sort of spread out and taking a lot of room, but we haven't seen structures that are like large towers. Is there a design issue there, or is that something that we may see in the future?
The problem with solar energy is that there is such and such energy in the sunlight per square meter. And there is no way to get more energy without increasing the area, right? So the best you can do is harvest every ray of sunlight from a specific area. But if you want more kilowatts, you need a bigger area. That's a problem of solar. yes, you see a lot of solar farms, big solar plants, but most of our solar energy would be from rooftop. If you just fly over, let's say you take off from JFK, just look out your window and see how many empty roofs we have. They are completely not used. It's a huge amount of space, and it sits on the grid, so you don't need to wire up all these systems. They're already sitting on the grid. There is enough rooftop in the US to power the entire of the US. There are enough rooftops in the first world, at least, to power the first world. There's enough area. You just need to cover it with solar panels, and the rooftops are usually not that used. If you look at high rises, I see someone asked about high rises. The problem with high rises is that the roof is relatively small compared to the amount of consumption you have in a high rise. And you want to use much of the roof for systems like air conditioning and I don't know what, chillers or things like that. So it's not very effective to put solar on high rises. You can, but it's marginal in its contribution. But even in a big city like, I don't know, New York, you have enough warehouse spaces and enough private homes to power big parts of the city with it. But that's the problem of solar. You need the area. Sunlight has energy per square meter.
So, Lior, this has been a terrific discussion. We're coming up at the top of the hour. I guess I want to just come back, maybe last question, with the term you'd like to use in the context of solar power. It just makes so much sense, a prosumer. Because I know now you're involved in, as a venture capitalist, you're looking at a lot of different industries and ways in which markets may be disrupted or changed in the future. And even your own hobby of carpentry, I sort of feel like, as an example, maybe we should be making our own furniture instead of getting it IKEA. I don't know. Just maybe give a thought to.
I don't think
that's not a good idea
to bring my furniture home. There's an expectation for a higher level. I'm not at that level yet.
Fair enough. But what are some examples of where we can become better prosumers, or that you think in markets in the foreseeable future anyway, where, you know, as we need to be thinking about not just what can we buy, but what are these kind of hybrid models?
So I will say one thing first. Fossil fuel is here to stay for a very, very long time, right? So seeing fossil fuel as the enemy or as evil or as something that needs to be scaled down in a too fast of a way is irrational and dangerous. Look at what's happening in Europe. We cannot live without fossil fuel for tens of years. But what we can do is we can all install a solar system. We can all manage our energy in a much more smart way. You would not believe how much money you can save, energy to the grid, and a lot of other things if you would manage your air conditioning smartly. Homes have thermal capacitance. You can pre-cool when power is cheap and cool less when power is expensive. There's lots of things that you can do. Do it smartly, use solar energy, use storage, use smart energy devices, and we will all be smart prosumers.
Awesome vision and great, very sort of sensible advice, frankly, I think, about how we should all be thinking about purchases in the future. For those of us that didn't grow up with a dude Shemesh on a water heater, a solar water heater on the top of our roofs, many of us still don't have those, but Israel really became the poster child of imagination, working with a limited amount of resources, and creating something that created a market and usage and an understanding by consumers that really, you know, it's one of those really incredible, remarkable stories among the many that we like to explore, you know, on our webinar series here. Next week, for those of you that are available next Sunday, we have an author who I met as a professor, a visiting Israeli professor at Georgetown University, where I went to school, and is now a member of Knesset. Dr. Yossi Shane has just produced a book called The Israel Century. And in a sense, he will actually put some further context around companies like Lior's and this broader phenomenon of Israel being a global powerhouse in many respects, even with its limited resources that it has. And that has implications for Israel as a country, that has implications for Israel as a Jewish state, that has implications for Israel as a democracy. And member of Knesset, Dr. Yossi Shane, is going to share his perspective that's laid out in this his new book. So come back, join us, check and make sure your clocks are set to the right daylight savings time for next week. And we hope everyone has a safe week. Lior, again, Lehitrot, and thank you.